The deafening silence of the church echoed with Rose Harper's heartbeat as she stared down the empty aisle where Jeffrey Bennett should have been standing. Her trembling hands clutched the small bouquet of wildflowers, the white satin of her hastily altered wedding gown straining against the slight swell of her 4-month pregnancy. The whispers behind her back grew louder with each passing minute, and Rose felt her knees begin to buckle beneath the weight of her humiliation. Just as she began to sway, a strong, calloused hand caught hers, steadying her before she could fall. Rose turned to find herself looking into the concerned eyes of a man she'd seen around town, but never properly met, the cowboy who worked at the Carson Ranch just outside of Willow Creek, Colorado. "Madam," he said quietly, his voice just loud enough for her to hear, "let me help you out of here." It was 1879, and in the small frontier town of Willow Creek, a woman left at the altar with a child on the way had few prospects ahead of her. But in that moment, Rose could only nod gratefully as the tall stranger guided her away from the prying eyes and cruel whispers. "I'm Heath Edwards," he said as they stepped outside into the bright June sunshine, "and I reckon you might need a friend right about now." Rose felt the tears she'd been holding back begin to spill over. "I'm Rose Harper," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I believe you may be right about that, Mr. Edwards." Heath's steady hand remained at her elbow as he led her away from the church, his broad shoulders shielding her from the curious stares of townsfolk who had gathered to witness her shame. "I've got my wagon around back," he said, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact. "Where can I take you, Miss Harper?" Rose stared blankly ahead, the reality of her situation crashing down around her. The small room she'd been renting above the millinery shop belonged to Jeffrey's aunt, who would surely turn her out now. Her parents were 3 months' journey away in Boston, and they had made their disappointment in her frontier foolishness abundantly clear when she'd left to teach at Willow Creek's small schoolhouse 2 years ago. I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I have nowhere to go." Heath's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained kind. "Then I'll take you to my sister's place for now. Sarah's got a good heart, and there's plenty of room at her boarding house on the edge of town." As he helped her into his wagon, careful of her elaborate dress, Rose felt numb. Just hours ago, she'd been certain her life was falling into place despite the scandalous circumstances. Jeffrey had sworn his love, promised to care for her and their child. His proposal had seemed a blessing after she discovered her condition and faced dismissal from her teaching position. Now she was alone, disgraced, and dependent on the kindness of a stranger. "Why are you helping me?" she asked as Heath climbed up beside her and flicked the reins. He was quiet for a moment, his profile strong against the backdrop of the distant mountains. "My mother found herself in a similar position once," he finally said. "Not many offered her kindness. I swore I'd never be the type to turn my back on someone who needs help." The wagon jolted forward, carrying Rose away from the church where her dreams had died and toward an uncertain future. As they rode in silence through the dusty streets of Willow Creek, she couldn't help but notice the strength in Heath's hands as they held the reins, the gentle way he'd steadied her when she'd needed it most. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching her bouquet of wilting wildflowers. Heath nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Everyone deserves a helping hand now and then, Miss Harper, even when it seems the whole world's turned against them." Sarah Edwards lived in a 2-story white clapboard house at the eastern edge of town, where the neat rows of buildings gave way to open prairie. Unlike the judgmental whispers that had followed Rose through town, Sarah's welcome was genuine, her blue eyes so similar to her brother's filled with compassion rather than condemnation. "You poor dear," she said, ushering Rose inside without a second thought. "Come in and sit down before you collapse. Heath, fetch some water and tell Maggie to bring tea." Before Rose could gather her thoughts, she found herself settled in a comfortable parlor, her elaborate wedding dress pooling around her ankles, a cup of sweet tea pressed into her hands. "I can't pay you," Rose blurted out, the reality of her situation becoming clearer with each passing moment. I have some savings, but not much, and Hush now, Sarah interrupted, her kind face serious. We'll worry about all that later. For now, you need rest. You're pale as a ghost and in your condition. Rose's free hand instinctively moved to her slightly rounded belly, her cheeks flushing with shame. There'll be no judgments in this house, Sarah continued firmly, catching the gesture. Life's complicated enough without adding the burden of others' opinions. You'll stay here tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. That night, in a small but clean room under Sarah Edwards' roof, Rose wept until she had no tears left. She cried for her lost position at the schoolhouse, for the child growing inside her who would now bear the stigma of illegitimacy, for her own foolishness in believing Jeffrey Bennett's promises of love and devotion. Most of all, she cried for the future she had imagined, a simple life with a husband who loved her, a home filled with children and laughter. When morning came, Rose woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed in the simple day dress Sarah had lent her, grateful to be out of her wedding gown, which now lay folded in the corner like a painful reminder of yesterday's humiliation. Downstairs, she found not only Sarah but Heath as well, his tall frame looking somewhat out of place at the delicate breakfast table. "Good morning, Miss Harper," he said, standing as she entered. "I hope you managed some rest." "A little," she admitted, taking the seat Sarah offered. "And please call me Rose." "Rose, then," Heath agreed with a slight nod. "I've been talking with Sarah about your situation." Rose felt her shoulders tense. "I don't want to be a burden. I can find work you already have if you want it," Sarah interrupted, pouring coffee into Rose's cup. "My regular help left last week to get married, and I need someone to assist with the cleaning and cooking. The pay isn't much, but it includes room and board." Rose stared at her, hardly daring to believe in such fortune. "You'd hire me, even knowing my circumstances?" Sarah's laugh was light and genuine. "Half the women in this territory have circumstances one way or another. They just hide them better than others. Besides, I need the help, and Heath says you were a schoolteacher, which means you can read and write. I could use someone who can keep the books as well as help with the rooms." Rose looked from Sarah to Heath, who was watching her with those steady blue eyes. "You vouched for me. You barely know me." A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks. "I know enough. This town's been talking about the refined Eastern lady teaching at the school since you arrived. Miss Abernathy at the general store says you've never been late paying your accounts, and Reverend Foster mentioned you've been helping with the Sunday school since you came to Willow Creek." "You asked about me." Rose couldn't hide her surprise. Heath shrugged, suddenly very interested in his coffee cup. "Just wanted to make sure Sarah wasn't taking in a horse thief," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in a small smile. "Heath has a ranch to run," Sarah explained, her eyes twinkling with something Rose couldn't quite identify. "But he's promised to stop by regularly to help with any heavy lifting while you're indisposed." Rose felt warmth flood her cheeks. "That's very kind, but no arguments," Heath said firmly. "A pregnant woman shouldn't be moving furniture or carrying heavy buckets. I'll be by every few days to help with the wood chopping and such." And so began Rose's new life at the Willow Creek boarding house. The first week passed in a blur of learning routines, meeting the handful of semi-permanent residents, a retired cavalry officer, a widowed shopkeeper, a young bank clerk, and a traveling salesman who stayed whenever he passed through town. If any of them had opinions about Rose's condition or her aborted wedding, they kept them to themselves in Sarah's presence. True to his word, Heath appeared every few days, usually arriving just before sunup to chop wood, repair loose boards, or help with any task Sarah deemed too strenuous for Rose. He rarely stayed long, and he spoke little, but Rose found herself watching the clock on the days he was expected, a strange flutter of anticipation in her chest that she firmly attributed to gratitude and nothing more. 3 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, Rose was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when she heard the now familiar sound of Heath's wagon approaching. She smoothed her apron over her growing belly, acutely aware of her appearance in a way that made her scold herself for vanity. "Morning, Rose," Heath called as he climbed down from the wagon. Today he wore a blue shirt that matched his eyes, his dark blonde hair slightly damp as though he dunked his head in water before coming to town. "Sarah inside. She's gone to order supplies at the general store," Rose replied, pinning a sheet to the line. "She left a list of things that need fixing if you have time," Heath nodded, reaching into the back of his wagon to retrieve his toolbox. "I've got most of the day. Carson gave me leave to help out after I finished the morning chores." Rose paused in her work. "Carson? I thought you had your own ranch." Heath's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Not yet. I work as foreman at the Carson place, but I'm saving for my own spread. Got my eye on a parcel north of here." "I'm sorry," Rose said quickly. "I just assumed." "No need to apologize," Heath assured her, his expression softening. "Most folks around here know my situation. I forget sometimes that you're still new to these parts." "Not so new," Rose reminded him with a small smile. "I've been in Willow Creek for 2 years now." "Teaching school doesn't give you much chance to learn the gossip," Heath observed, setting down his toolbox. "Especially when you're, what did Sarah call it, a refined Eastern lady?" Rose couldn't help but laugh at his imitation of Sarah's voice. "I'm hardly refined. My father is a bookkeeper, not some wealthy merchant. I came west because I wanted adventure and because teaching positions for women are plentiful here, unlike in Boston." "And how's that adventure working out for you?" Heath asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Rose's hand drifted to her belly. "Not quite as I imagined," she admitted. "But then, life rarely follows the path we expect." Heath held her gaze for a long moment before nodding slowly. "That's the truth of it," he agreed. "The trick is learning to ride the trail you're on, even when it takes you through rough country." As the summer progressed into early autumn, Rose found herself settling into life at the boarding house. Her belly grew more pronounced, forcing Sarah to let out the seams of the dresses she'd given Rose, then finally to commission new ones from the dressmaker with fabric bought from Rose's modest savings. The regular boarders treated her with a kind of protective courtesy, particularly Colonel Hargrove, the retired cavalry officer who had lost his left arm in the war. He took to escorting Rose on her errands around town, his military bearing and fierce glare silencing any whispers that might have followed her. And then there was Heath, whose visits had increased from every few days to nearly daily. Sometimes he came with legitimate tasks: a leaky roof to patch, a broken step to fix, a delivery of firewood. Other times his excuses were flimsier, checking if Sarah needed anything from the Carson ranch, bringing a basket of fresh eggs that the hens had laid in excess, dropping off a rabbit he'd snared that would just go to waste otherwise. Rose found herself looking forward to these visits more than was wise. Heath Edwards was unfailingly kind, unexpectedly funny when he chose to share his thoughts, and possessed of a quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time since Jeffrey's betrayal. But she had learned her lesson about trusting her heart too easily, and besides, what man would want a woman carrying another's child? One evening in late September, Rose sat on the boarding house porch, enjoying the cool evening air and the brief respite from her duties. Sarah had gone to a church meeting, and the boarders were either out or retired to their rooms, leaving Rose with a rare moment of solitude. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention to the road, where Heath appeared on his chestnut gelding rather than in his usual wagon. He wore his good shirt and had clearly made an effort with his appearance, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. "Evening, Rose," he called, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. "I was hoping to find you alone." Rose felt her pulse quicken, both at his words and at the unusual nervousness in his manner. "Is something wrong?" she asked, making room for him on the porch swing. Heath sat beside her, careful to leave a proper distance between them. "Nothing's wrong," he assured her. I've been thinking about your situation." Rose stiffened slightly. "My situation," Heath ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its careful arrangement. "That came out wrong. I meant your future and the baby's future." "I'm managing," Rose said carefully. "Sarah has been more than generous and the work isn't too difficult." "But what happens after the baby comes?" Heath pressed. "Sarah's kind, but a boarding house is no place to raise a child, and the talk in town." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "The talk in town will continue regardless of where I live," Rose said, her voice tight. "I made my choices, Mr. Edwards, and I'll face the consequences." "Heath," he corrected gently, "and you misunderstand me. I'm not here to judge you, Rose. I'm here to offer a solution." Rose's hands trembled slightly in her lap. "What kind of solution?" Heath took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "Marriage," he said simply. "I'm offering marriage." Rose stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want to marry me, a woman carrying another man's child. A woman who's been publicly humiliated and cast aside." "I want to marry you, Rose Harper," Heath confirmed, his blue eyes steady on hers. "A woman who's shown remarkable courage in the face of adversity, a woman who works hard without complaint. A woman who deserves better than the hand she's been dealt." Rose shook her head, unable to process his words. "But why? You barely know me." "I know enough," Heath insisted. "I know you're kind to everyone, even those who whisper behind your back. I know you read poetry to Colonel Hargrove when his eyes are too tired to see the print. I know you're smart enough to have fixed Sarah's accounting books that were a mess for years. And I know that when you smile, really smile, not the polite one you give the boarders, it lights up your whole face in a way that makes it hard for me to breathe." Rose felt tears welling in her eyes. "Heath, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know it's sudden. But I want you to know that the offer is genuine. I've got savings, enough for a small place of my own soon. It wouldn't be fancy, but it would be a real home for you and the baby." "What about love?" Rose whispered, the word feeling fragile on her tongue after how Jeffrey had tarnished it. Heath's expression softened. "I believe love can grow, Rose. I already care for you more than I've cared for any woman. I'm not asking for your heart right away, just a chance to earn it in time." Before Rose could respond, the sound of the front door opening interrupted them, and Sarah appeared, her expression curious as she took in the scene before her. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," she said, though her tone suggested she very much hoped she was. Heath stood, clearing his throat. "Just having a conversation, Sarah. I should be getting back to the ranch before it gets too dark." He turned to Rose, his eyes conveying what his words could not in his sister's presence. "Think about what I said, Rose. There's no rush." As Heath rode away, Sarah settled into the spot he had vacated on the swing. "He asked you to marry him, didn't he?" she said without preamble. Rose gaped at her. "How did you? My brother's been sweet on you since the day he brought you here," Sarah replied with a smile. "And he's never been one to wait once he's made up his mind. The only surprise is that it took him this long to speak up." "But it doesn't make sense," Rose protested. "I'm carrying another man's child. I have nothing to offer him." Sarah's laugh was gentle. "Oh, Rose. For a smart woman, you can be remarkably blind. Heath doesn't care about the child's parentage. He sees a baby who needs a father and a woman he admires who needs a partner. The rest is just details to him. But what will people say?" Rose asked, voicing the fear that had immediately sprung to mind. "They'll say he's a fool or a saint, depending on who's talking," Sarah admitted, "but Heath has never much cared for others' opinions. And a hard-working foreman with prospects for his own land can weather a bit of gossip better than a woman alone." Rose twisted her hands in her lap, torn between hope and fear. "I don't want him to regret it. The only thing my brother would regret is not trying," Sarah said firmly. "Now, what did you tell him?" "Nothing yet," Rose admitted. "You came out before I could answer." Sarah's eyes twinkled with mischief. Well then, perhaps I should make myself scarce tomorrow when he inevitably finds another excuse to visit. That night, Rose lay awake long into the dark hours, her mind whirling with thoughts of Heath's proposal. She had come to care for him deeply over these past months, finding in his steady presence a comfort she had never known with Geoffrey's flashy charm. But was that enough to build a marriage upon? And what of the child she carried? Was it fair to bind Heath to another man's offspring? By morning, she was no closer to an answer, her emotions a tangled knot of hope, fear, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. As Sarah had predicted, Heath arrived mid-morning, ostensibly to fix a broken hinge on the kitchen door. "I'll just be in town for a bit," Sarah announced almost immediately, her attempts at subtlety so transparent that Rose couldn't help but smile despite her nervousness. "I might be some time. Don't wait lunch for me." Once Sarah had gone, Heath set down his tools and turned to Rose, his expression serious. "Have you thought about what I said?" Rose nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "I have thought of little else." "And," Heath prompted gently when she didn't continue. "I'm afraid," Rose admitted, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Afraid that you're acting out of pity, afraid that you'll come to resent me and the baby, afraid of trusting my heart again after being so terribly wrong before." Heath crossed the room slowly, as if approaching a skittish colt. "Rose," he said softly, "this isn't pity. I admire you. I enjoy your company more than anyone else's. When I'm not here, I'm thinking about the next time I can see you. If that's not the beginning of love, then I don't know what is. And the baby." Rose pressed, one hand protectively covering her swollen belly. "The baby is innocent in all this," Heath said firmly. "I was raised by a man who wasn't my blood father after my mother found herself in circumstances similar to yours. He was the best father a boy could ask for, and I hope to be the same for your child." Rose felt tears threatening again. "You make it sound so simple." "It can be," Heath insisted, taking her hands in his. "Not easy, perhaps, but simple. We marry, we build a life together. We raise this child and perhaps others if we're blessed. We face whatever comes together." The warmth of his calloused hands around hers felt right in a way Rose couldn't explain. "I care for you, Heath," she whispered, "more than I should after knowing you such a short time. But I'm not sure if that's enough." "It's enough to start with," Heath said. "The rest will come in time if you're willing to give us that chance." He paused, his blue eyes searching hers. "Are you, Rose, willing to take a chance on me, on us?" In that moment, looking into his earnest face, Rose felt something unfurl in her chest, a cautious, fragile hope that perhaps the path that had led her through such pain might yet wend its way to happiness. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I'm willing to try." The joy that transformed Heath's face made her breath catch. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You won't regret it, Rose, I promise you that." "When?" she asked, practical considerations suddenly flooding her mind. "The baby will come in December, and I, as soon as possible," Heath interrupted. "Next week, if Reverend Foster is available. A simple ceremony, nothing that would remind you of before, unless you want to wait." Rose shook her head. "No, next week would be fine, perfect actually." The sooner they married, the sooner the town would have new gossip to chew on, and the better it would be for the baby when it arrived. When Sarah returned and heard the news, her delight was uncontained. She immediately began planning what she called a proper wedding breakfast, even if the wedding itself is to be small, and insisting that Rose must have a new dress, not white perhaps, but a lovely blue that would match Heath's eyes. The news spread quickly through Willow Creek, eliciting reactions that ranged from scandalized whispers to genuine congratulations. Colonel Hargrove appointed himself Rose's protector through it all, glaring down anyone who dared to comment negatively within his hearing. "Edwards is a good man," he declared loudly in the general store when Mrs. Abernathy made a thinly veiled remark about hasty arrangements. "Any fool can see he's smitten with the lady and she with him. The rest is nobody's business but theirs." The day before the wedding, As Rose was helping Sarah prepare the boarding house for the small reception that would follow the ceremony, a familiar figure appeared at the door. Jeffrey Bennett, looking travel-worn and desperate. "Rose," he called, pushing past Sarah, who had answered his knock. "Rose, I've come back for you." Rose froze, the tablecloth she had been folding slipping from her nerveless fingers. Jeffrey looked much as he had 3 months ago, handsome in a flashy way, with his carefully waxed mustache and expensive Eastern clothes. But now she noticed the slightly calculating look in his eyes, the way his charming smile didn't quite reach them. "Mr. Bennett," she said coldly, one hand instinctively moving to her now prominent belly. "I believe you forfeited any right to speak to me when you failed to appear at our wedding." Jeffrey's expression turned pleading. "It was a terrible mistake, darling. I panicked, but I've come to make it right. We can be married today, right now." "Rose is engaged to be married tomorrow," Sarah interjected firmly. "To a man who didn't need 3 months and a visible pregnancy to decide she was worth committing to." Jeffrey's face darkened. "This is absurd. Rose, you can't possibly prefer some rough cowboy to me. Think of the child, our child. Don't you want it to have its real father?" "A real father is someone who's there when needed," came a deep voice from the doorway. Heath stood there, his tall frame filling the entrance, his expression thunderous as he took in the scene. "Not someone who runs at the first sign of responsibility." Jeffrey turned, his hand moving instinctively to where a gentleman from the East might carry a concealed derringer. "This doesn't concern you." "My fiancée concerns me very much," Heath replied evenly, stepping into the room, "as does anyone who upsets her." Rose moved to Heath's side, drawing strength from his solid presence. "You should leave, Jeffrey. Whatever we might have had ended the moment you left me standing alone at the altar." "You'll regret this," Jeffrey spat, his charming facade crumbling entirely. "Both of you." "That's my child, and I have rights." "Rights you surrendered when you abandoned them both," Heath countered, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now, I suggest you leave Willow Creek. The stage heading east leaves in an hour." For a tense moment, it seemed Jeffrey might refuse, but something in Heath's steady gaze must have convinced him of the futility of further argument. With a final venomous glare, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Rose realized she was trembling only when Heath's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, surprised to discover that, beyond the initial shock, she felt little at seeing Jeffrey again. The man who had once held her heart now seemed like a stranger, his handsome features empty of the qualities she now knew to value: kindness, honesty, steadfastness. "I'm fine," she assured Heath, meaning it, more certain than ever about tomorrow. The wedding took place at noon the following day, a simple ceremony in Reverend Foster's small church with only Sarah, Colonel Hargrove, and a few of the boarders as witnesses. Rose wore a dress of soft blue calico, new but practical enough to be worn after the wedding as well. Heath had splurged on a new shirt and had his good boots polished to a mirror shine. As they spoke their vows, Rose found herself focusing not on the words themselves but on the man before her, his strong, honest face, the gentle way he held her hands, the unmistakable tenderness in his eyes when he looked at her. This was no desperate arrangement, she realized. This was the beginning of something true. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Foster announced, and Heath leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle, yet held the promise of deeper passion to come. The small wedding breakfast at the boarding house was a cheerful affair, with Sarah outdoing herself to provide a feast despite rationed supplies. Colonel Hargrove proposed a toast to the newlyweds, his usually gruff voice softening as he wished them all the happiness two good people deserve. As the afternoon waned, Heath helped Rose into his wagon, which was loaded with her few possessions and wedding gifts from the boarders: a patchwork quilt, a set of tin cookware, a rocking chair that Colonel Hargrove had commissioned from the town's carpenter. "Where are we going?" Rose asked as they left the town behind. She had assumed they would stay at the boarding house until Heath's new property was ready. "It's a surprise," Heath replied with a smile, his hand covering hers on the seat between them. "One I've been working on for weeks, hoping you'd say yes." Half an hour's drive from town, Heath turned the wagon down a narrow track that Rose hadn't noticed on her infrequent journeys outside Willow Creek. The path wound through a stand of cottonwoods before opening onto a small clearing where a cabin stood modest but solidly built, with a covered porch and smoke curling from the stone chimney. "Welcome home, Mrs. Edwards," Heath said softly as the wagon came to a stop. Rose stared in wonder. "But how? When?" "I've owned this land for 2 years," Heath explained, helping her down from the wagon. "Been building the cabin bit by bit as I could afford the materials. It's small, but there's room to expand as needed. The Carson Ranch is just over that ridge, an easy ride each day until I can build up my own herd." "It's perfect," Rose whispered, taking in the neat yard, the small corral to one side, the garden plot already turned for spring planting. "It's just a start," Heath cautioned. "Nothing fancy like you might have had back east." Rose turned to him, her heart so full she could barely speak. "It's everything I never knew I wanted," she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "Thank you, Heath." He caught her hand, his expression suddenly serious. "There's something else I need to say, Rose, something I should have made clear before." Rose felt a flicker of apprehension. "What is it?" "I told you I believed love could grow between us," Heath said slowly. "But the truth is, for me, it's already grown. I love you, Rose Edwards. I think I have since that day in the church when you stood so brave despite everything. You don't need to say it back, not until you're ready, if ever, but I wanted you to know." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so intense it almost hurt. "Oh, Heath," she whispered. "I think perhaps I've loved you longer than I realized. I was just too afraid to name it." The look of wonder that transformed his face was something Rose knew she would remember all her days. Heath gathered her gently into his arms, mindful of her condition, and this time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, no holding back. "Come inside," he murmured against her lips. "Let me show you our home." The cabin's interior was simple but welcoming, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a small bedroom to one side, and a second, tiny room that Heath had already prepared with a handmade cradle. "I'm not much of a carpenter," he apologized as Rose ran her fingers over the smooth wood of the cradle. "But I wanted the baby to have something made by its father." Rose's heart swelled at his words, at the easy way he claimed a child not of his blood. "It's beautiful," she assured him. "And so is everything else. I can't believe you did all this while working at the Carson Ranch." "I had some help," Heath admitted. "Carson's been good to me, and some of the other hands pitched in. They'll be by tomorrow to help unload the wagon properly. I wanted tonight to be just for us, to get settled." That first night in their new home, as they lay together in the bed Heath had built with his own hands, Rose felt a contentment she had never known. Heath's arm curved protectively around her, his hand resting on the swell of her belly where their child, for it was theirs now, in all the ways that mattered, occasionally kicked against his palm. "I never thought I could be this happy," Rose confessed in the darkness. "After Jeffrey left me at the altar, I thought my life was over, but now I see it was just beginning." Heath pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We're just getting started, Rose. The best is yet to come." The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery, as Rose and Heath learned the rhythms of married life. Heath rode out each morning to the Carson Ranch, returning by sundown except on the rare occasions when his duties kept him overnight. Rose turned the small cabin into a home, adding feminine touches that Heath claimed to grumble about but secretly admired. As her pregnancy advanced, Rose found herself grateful for Heath's foresight in placing their home so close to his work. Carson's wife, a motherly woman with 6 grown children of her own, rode over regularly to check on Rose and bring supplies from town, saving her the increasingly difficult journey. "You've got yourself a good one there," Mrs. Carson remarked one afternoon as she helped Rose hang curtains she'd sewn from flour sacks. "Heath's been the best foreman my husband's ever had. Honest as the day is long and works harder than two men. Been like a son to us since he came here 8 years ago." "He never talks much about his past," Rose ventured, curious about the man who had become her husband. Mrs. Carson nodded knowingly. Not surprising, it wasn't easy for him or his sister. Their mother was a good woman who made one mistake and paid for it her whole life. Their stepfather, the man who raised Heath, was a saint, by all accounts. Married their mother when no one else would look at her twice, raised her children as his own. Heath adored him. Rose thought of Heath's gentle hands preparing the cradle for her child, his unwavering acceptance of her condition. "He takes after him then," she said softly. "That he does," Mrs. Carson agreed. When James Edwards died, Heath was just 16, but he stepped up, made sure his mother and sister were provided for. Worked 3 jobs until his mother remarried a few years later. Even then, he kept sending money to help with Sarah's schooling. Each new piece of information only confirmed what Rose already knew, that she had married a man of exceptional character. A man whose capacity for love and loyalty ran soul deep. December arrived with an unusual cold snap, turning the world outside their cabin into a frozen landscape of crystalline beauty. Rose's time was drawing near, her body heavy and unwieldy as she moved around their small home, preparing for the baby's arrival. Heath had begun staying closer to home, arranging with Carson to work only the morning shift so he could be back by midday. He chopped extra wood, stocked the pantry with supplies, and made sure Rose was never alone for long, his concern for her touching if occasionally smothering. "I'm not made of glass," she reminded him one evening as he insisted on taking the heavy kettle from her hands. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife," Heath replied, his voice gruff with emotion. "Not with my child. I aim to take proper care of you both." Rose's heart melted at his words, at the possessive tenderness in his expression when he said, "my child." In the 3 months of their marriage, Heath had never once referred to the baby as anything but theirs, his commitment to them both unwavering. The pains began in the early hours of a snowy morning, 2 weeks before the new year. Rose woke to a cramping sensation that tightened across her belly, stealing her breath. For a moment, she lay still, wondering if it was another false alarm like the twinges she'd felt the previous week. Then another pain gripped her stronger than the first, and she knew. "Heath," she whispered, shaking her husband's shoulder. "Heath, it's time." He was instantly awake, his eyes wide with alarm and excitement. "Are you sure? It's not supposed to be for another week at least." "The baby has its own schedule," Rose managed through gritted teeth as another contraction built. "And it's decided that today is the day." Heath was out of bed in an instant, pulling on his clothes and boots. "I'll ride for the midwife and the doctor," he said, his voice steady despite the panic she could see in his eyes. "Mrs. Carson said she'd come stay with you when the time came." "There's no time for all that," Rose gasped as the next contraction came faster and stronger than the last. "The baby's coming quickly. Just get Mrs. Carson. She's delivered more babies than the doctor anyway." Heath looked torn, clearly reluctant to leave her even for the short ride to the Carson ranch. "Are you sure? What if something goes wrong?" Rose reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Nothing will go wrong, but this baby isn't waiting for formalities. Please, Heath, hurry." With a last, anguished look, Heath pressed a kiss to her forehead and hurried out. Rose heard him saddling his horse in the yard, then the thunder of hooves as he galloped toward the Carson ranch. Alone, Rose forced herself to breathe through the increasing contractions, drawing on half-remembered advice from her mother and the practical knowledge she'd gleaned from Mrs. Carson's visits. She managed to build up the fire and arrange blankets and clean linens before the pains became too intense to do more than focus on breathing. It seemed an eternity before she heard the sound of horses approaching, though her rational mind knew it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Mrs. Carson burst through the door in a flurry of snow and efficiency, Heath right behind her, his face pale with worry. "Well now, let's see what we've got here," Mrs. Carson said briskly, shedding her coat and rolling up her sleeves as she approached the bed where Rose had retreated. "Heath, put on water to boil and then make yourself useful or get out from underfoot." To Rose's surprise, Heath chose the former, following Mrs. Carson's instructions with the same quiet competence he brought to every task. As the hours passed and the labor intensified, he remained steadfast, supporting Rose's back when she needed to change positions, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement when the pain threatened to overwhelm her. "You're doing wonderfully," he told her as the winter sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the cabin windows. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, Rose Edwards." Just when Rose felt she couldn't bear another moment, Mrs. Carson announced that it was time to push. Heath moved behind her, supporting her weight as she bore down with all her remaining strength. "I can see the head," Mrs. Carson exclaimed, "dark hair just like its mama. One more big push, Rose." With a final, monumental effort, Rose felt the baby slip from her body, the relief so profound she nearly wept. A moment of silence, then the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, a lusty, indignant cry as her child took its first breath. "You have a daughter," Mrs. Carson announced, her voice thick with emotion as she placed the squalling infant on Rose's chest. "A perfect little girl." Rose gazed down at the tiny, red-faced creature in wonder, counting fingers and toes, marveling at the delicate shell of her ear, the surprising strength of her grip when she wrapped her hand around Rose's finger. "Heath," she whispered, turning to look at her husband. "Look what we made." Heath's expression as he gazed at their daughter was one of such naked adoration that Rose felt tears spring to her eyes. He reached out one finger to gently stroke the baby's cheek, his hand trembling slightly. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "just like her mother." Mrs. Carson busied herself with the practical matters of childbirth, cleaning up and ensuring Rose was comfortable, before tactfully suggesting that the new family might want some time alone. "I'll be back to check on you tomorrow," she promised, as she gathered her things. "Unless you need me sooner." When she had gone, Heath settled carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving the small bundle in Rose's arms. "What shall we call her?" he asked. Rose looked down at their daughter, studying her tiny features that somehow combined Rose's dark hair with something of Heath's sturdy build. Despite what Jeffrey had said about his rights, Rose knew in her heart that this child belonged to the man beside her in all the ways that truly mattered. "Hope," she said softly, "Hope Edwards, because that's what you gave me when I had none, hope for a future, hope for happiness." Heath's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to first his daughter's forehead, then his wife's lips. "Hope," he agreed. "Perfect for a new beginning." As the winter snow fell softly outside their window, the small family huddled together in the warmth of their cabin, the first chapter of their life together complete, and a new one just beginning. Spring came early that year, bringing with it warm breezes that melted the snow and coaxed green shoots from the earth around their cabin. Hope thrived, growing from a tiny, dependent newborn into a sturdy 3-month-old with her mother's dark curls, and her father's blue eyes, a genetic coincidence that delighted Heath beyond measure. "She looks more like you every day," Rose observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Hope was asleep in Heath's arms, her small body curled trustingly against his chest. "Poor child," Heath joked, but his expression as he gazed down at his daughter was one of such profound love that Rose felt her heart contract. "I think she's the luckiest girl in the territory," Rose said softly, "to have you for a father." Heath looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that still made her breath catch. "I'm the lucky one," he insisted, "to have you both." Their life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Heath continued working at the Carson Ranch, but he had begun to acquire his own small herd, carefully selecting stock with an eye toward the future. Rose kept a vegetable garden and a few chickens, and had recently begun taking in mending and simple sewing from town families, adding a small but steady income to their savings. The cabin had expanded as well, with Heath and some of the Carson hands adding a proper bedroom for Hope, and a larger kitchen with a window that overlooked the garden. Rose had planted flowers along the path to the door and hung curtains on every window, transforming the simple structure into a true home. Visits to town became more frequent as the weather improved. Rose found that her status as Heath Edwards' wife and the mother of his adorable daughter had largely eclipsed the scandal of her previous circumstances. Even Mrs. Abernathy, who had been among the most judgmental, now cooed over Hope and saved special ribbons for that sweet baby. One Sunday after church, as Rose chatted with Mrs. Carson while Heath showed off Hope to his admiring co-workers, she noticed a familiar figure watching from across the street: Jeffrey Bennett, his once flashy clothes now showing signs of wear, his expression a mixture of bitterness and regret. Rose felt a momentary tightening in her chest, not of longing but of pity. According to town gossip, Jeffrey had returned to Willow Creek 2 months ago, having failed to make his fortune back east. He now worked as a clerk in the same bank where he had once been assistant manager, his prospects diminished by his reputation for unreliability. As if sensing her gaze, Jeffrey looked up, his eyes meeting Rose's across the dusty street. For a long moment they regarded each other, Rose serene in her happiness, Jeffrey haunted by what might have been. Then Heath returned to her side, Hope babbling happily in his arms, and the connection broke as Jeffrey turned away. "Everything all right?" Heath asked, noticing her distraction. Rose smiled up at him, taking Hope into her own arms. "Everything is perfect," she assured him, meaning every word. That night, after Hope was asleep in her cradle, Rose and Heath sat before the fireplace, discussing plans for the coming months. Carson had offered Heath a parcel of land adjacent to their current property, prime grazing land with a year-round spring. "It would stretch our savings," Heath admitted, "but with the cattle we already have and the new calves coming, we could make it work. In 5 years, we could have a proper ranch, Rose, something to leave to Hope and any brothers or sisters she might have." Rose's heart quickened at the casual mention of more children. They had been careful since Hope's birth, both aware of the demands of caring for a new baby while building their future. But the thought of giving Hope siblings, of expanding their family, filled her with quiet joy. "I think we should do it," she said decisively. "We've been careful with our money, and the sowing brings in more than I expected. If we're frugal for another year or two, we'll manage." Heath's smile was brilliant in the firelight. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Rose Edwards?" "Not in the last few hours," she teased, setting aside her mending to move into his arms. "A terrible oversight," Heath murmured against her hair, "one I intend to remedy immediately." Later, as they lay entwined in their bed, Rose's head pillowed on Heath's chest, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of Jeffrey's betrayal, once so acute, had faded to a distant memory, like a story she had read about someone else's life. In its place was a deep contentment, a bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "What are you thinking about?" Heath asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About how endings can become beginnings," Rose replied, pressing a kiss to his chest just above his heart. "About how sometimes the worst day of your life can lead you to the best." Heath tightened his arms around her. "The day you were left at the altar was the luckiest day of my life," he admitted, "though I'd never have wished you that pain. I would endure it 1,000 times over to end up here," Rose said with simple honesty, "with you, with Hope, with the life we're building." As summer bloomed across the prairie, their small ranch flourished along with it. The additional land proved to be a wise investment, providing ample grazing for their growing herd. Heath hired 2 young cowboys to help with the increased workload, allowing him to spend more time close to home. Hope's first birthday arrived in December, celebrated with a small gathering that included the Carsons, Sarah, and a few of the Hands who had become like family. Rose had baked a special cake and sewn Hope a new dress from fabric Sarah had brought from Denver on her last trip. "She's going to be a beauty," Mrs. Carson declared as Hope toddled from guest to guest, charming everyone with her bright smile and adventurous spirit, just like her mama. "But with her daddy's determination," Rose added, watching as Hope persisted in climbing onto a chair despite repeated failures. "Nothing stops her once she set her mind to something." "A fine quality in these parts," Colonel Hargrove commented. He had become a frequent visitor to their ranch, finding in Heath a willing listener to his war stories, and in Rose a surrogate daughter of sorts. The frontier is no place for the faint of heart. As the party wound down and their guests departed, Heath caught Rose around the waist, pulling her close as Hope played contentedly with her new wooden horse, a gift from one of the Hands who had revealed an unexpected talent for carving. "Happy?" he asked, his voice low in her ear. "Completely," she assured him, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. "Though I have some news that might make us even happier." Heath raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Hope will have a brother or sister by next summer," Rose said softly, watching his face for his reaction. "I'm certain this time." The joy that transformed Heath's features was answer enough, but his words, whispered against her lips as he gathered her close, sealed the moment in Rose's heart forever. "Every day with you is a blessing I never dreamed I'd have. Thank you for letting me catch you when you fell, Rose Edwards." Rose smiled, thinking of that fateful day in the church when a stranger's hand had steadied her, changing the course of her life forever. "Thank you for being there to catch me," she whispered back, "and for showing me that sometimes falling can lead to flying." Outside their window, snow began to fall gently on the land that was now truly their own, the future stretching before them as vast and full of promise as the western sky.